Someone in the chat just said...
Speaking of, how have...
Hello there. Hello, everyone. It's Kyle here from the podcast of Surprise, and I'm super excited to be joined here by Aziz Zaracania and Michal Tabrake. I am Kylan Trentamirth, and today we are here for episode 9 of the podcast of Surprise. I'm surprised we survived this year and this far with our podcast, but we're so happy to be here. Episode 9, first short story in Sword of Destiny, and we're going to be covering The Bounds of Reason. I believe this is Aziz's favorite short story. Aziz?
It's a tough call. I think it's at least my favorite of this book. It's maybe not my favorite overall. It's so hard. I have such a hard time picking favorites, especially amongst things I love so much. So yeah, it's a nominee. Let's call it that much. It's up there. I really do like it. It gets better on reread. There's a lot of nuance, a lot of fun things to consider. And having read the whole series and seeing how it reflects back on some of these early themes, yeah, it's just another thing that I think it's pretty strong in that regard.
So as I said, our names, we were having a huge laugh because we always change our names between each episode. And I'm like, I don't know if I should take Kyle or Trenton Mirth because Michal might go villain Trenton Michal or something like that. But anyways, Michal, what's going on?
Not too much. Good to be back. Good to be starting Sword of Destiny. I think I like this book overall better than The Last Wish. So I'm really excited to get into these stories and edge closer to really Geralt and Yennefer's Raison d'etre and the whole reason why we're reading this story.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the difference between Last Wish and this book, and also The Blood of Elves. But also, chat, feel free, Room Raider today, Michal's new background. I rated it a 9.5 because it lacks a Novellin poster, but Aziz gave it a 10 out of 10. But this is Michal's new background. We like it, and yeah, we would love for you to also have your input as well on her new room. So for those of you who have been here before, we have 2 different versions of the podcast. We have this one, which we do live once a month on YouTube. We have a playlist on the Fandom Media YouTube channel, my channel, and it's all there for you to listen to. But also, we have another version of the podcast on Anchor where you can find all sorts of different links to places like Spotify, iTunes, where we upload the downloadable version of the podcast. So 2 different versions of the podcast. Before we get into the actual analysis, we're going to get into the history, the lore. Aziz is going to do an amazing synopsis. We're going to talk about the characters, a little bit of a bestiary. So we've got a lot of different stuff we're going to talk about today. Aziz, we have some supporters on Anchor, and that's been increasing and really helping out the podcast.
Absolutely. We want to give some thanks to Maura, Andrew, Ryan, Sam, James, LC, and Anonymous. Yes, very much appreciate that. We're still a pretty new podcast, so getting support early on is very encouraging, very motivating, and very much appreciated. We'll keep them coming.
So yeah, you don't have to support the podcast monetarily. If you're here hanging out with us, we really appreciate it. Of course, like the video, subscribe. Also check out my friendly co-hosts, YouTube channels, and content in the description of the video. All the links are there to our podcast downloadable version and our playlist on YouTube. And if you do want to support, you can find that link on Anchor, like I said in the description of the video. $1, $5, or $10 to support the podcast. But now, Michal, shall we start off with a quote?
Yes. Okay. Here's my goal, my purpose. Thanks to him, I shall prove, Geralt of Rivia, that there is no limit as to what's possible. You too, one day, will discover such a purpose, Witcher. Even those who are different deserve to live.
Geralt the Witcher is in a cave hunting a basilisk. He's armed with his usual sword and not, I say, a mirror. Unbeknownst to even Geralt himself, he's been killed by the basilisk thanks to that lack, according to a huge man in a leather apron standing well outside the cave amidst other curious townfolk.
He is now dead, as surely as the sun shines in the sky. It was plain from the beginning that he was headed towards death like all the others before him. He didn't even take a mirror with him, only a sword. And everybody knows you need a mirror in order to kill a basilisk.
Given this overwhelming evidence of the Witcher's untimely death here in the first few paragraphs of a book we're just starting, well, I'd say we're all pretty disappointed and a bit confused. Some of the townsfolk move to loot Geralt's belongings, but an unarmed stranger appears. Apparently no fan of looters, he says,
"Leave the horse alone, my darling."
The looters seem to think they have the edge against this solitary, weaponless man, but his Zerrikanian protectoresses emerge, and they have sabers whose edges are far more deadly. So, too, the wielders. The townsfolk we quoted loses his head after the ensuing dialogue, quite literally. Geralt emerges from the cave during this exchange, surprisingly alive after all, despite the now headless man's claims. He throws the basilisk corpse to the ground in frustration, realizing that the people he was doing a service for almost robbed him. And they're underpaying him. But his mood turns positively quickly when he realizes the generosity of strangers, a rare thing, stopped the robbery in progress. Not content with a single good deed, the man, who introduces himself as Borch 3 Jackdaws, a truly fantastic name, invites Geralt to dinner at his expense. He introduces his companions as well, using their shortened nicknames, Tea and Vea. Geralt is wary, as he's accustomed to most people treating him like a leper, but Borch insists that shunning witchers is an opinion worthy of those who bang sheep. Geralt seems almost touched and removes his glove to shake Borch's hand. Excuse me. Sneakily, the inn they dine at is called the Pensive Dragon. Borch, though not richly dressed, is flush with coin, almost as if he's been hoarding it for many years. His generosity in ordering food and beverage and in tipping the proprietor in gold is notable. Once a bit of food and drink has been consumed, the conversation turns to philosophy, and we love when that happens. Borch makes the case that order and chaos are natural forces that all must reckon with. Geralt, as we've seen him do before, says he prefers to remain neutral and just do his job, while claiming not all things can be defined by order and chaos. The example of dragons is raised.
Bad example, interrupted Geralt. You see, the boundary becomes blurred already. I don't kill dragons, in spite of the fact, no doubt, they represent chaos.
Why is that? 3 Jackdaws licked his fingers. But that's outrageous. Surely of all the monsters, the dragon is the most dangerous, vicious, and cruel. Most terrible of all the reptiles. It attacks humans, spits fire, and it even steals virgins. Haven't you heard enough stories about that? Is it possible that you, Witcher, do not have a few dragon slayings in your list of accomplishments?
I do not hunt dragons, Geralt replied dryly.
Borch expresses astonishment at this and further inquires while continuing to eat and drink with no sign of slowing down. Staying on the subject of dragons, Borch further inquires as to Geralt's knowledge of the different types of dragon, in particular the golden variety. Geralt says firmly that they don't exist, and if they did, they'd be
Mutants. The muscles in Geralt's jaw tensed. Mutants are sterile, Borch. Only legends permit what nature condemns. Only myths can ignore the limits of what's possible.
Vea, who had previously shown off her sword skills and her looks, now shows off her insight and empathy, perceiving the deep hurt in Geralt over that statement, and moves to comfort him, realizing the Witcher is including himself in that sentiment. Borch, perhaps thinking that partying is a better remedy for such feelings, orders a tub for the 4 of them, and they continue their drinking upstairs. Cut to the next day where it seems...
We got a con here, guys.
Cut to the next day where it seems they've got a small problem regarding a bridge crossing. Turns out the King of Nidemir has cordoned off the area, though it's not part of his realm. Many travelers are stuck waiting for this to be resolved, unsure of when that might be. For the meantime, only those with passes can get through. Amidst all these waiting, uncertain folk is none other than Jaskier, who is, quote, the most celebrated of minstrels and poets for 1,000 miles around, according to him. Having been there a while, he's able to explain the situation, and quickly enough, we learn why the bridge is blocked. There's a dragon. Apparently, they've tried to kill it with a poisoned sheep, but only made it very sick. Borch, for one, is glad to hear it still lives. With the various explanations, Geralt seems to grasp what's happening. The king wants the treasure. Seems simple enough. But wait, it's not the treasure that the king is interested in, though surely it's a nice bonus. The real treasure is this entire region called Malior. It appears the locals created a false prophecy stating that he who slays a dragon in the region becomes its king. They thought themselves safe because, well, no one has seen a dragon in this area for a few hundred years. But, well, if Nidamir kills it, he gets the country, and the dragon is sick from the poison. So shouldn't be that hard. However, Nidamir has no intention of fighting the dragon personally. Instead, he's put out the word for dragon slayers, and several have answered the call. A trio called the Crinford Reavers, a famous upstanding knight called Ike of Denezle, and a band of dwarfs led by one Yarpen Zigrin. Each of these have slain multiple dragons in their careers. This all makes it clear why Jaskier is here too. A kingdom in the balance, a dragon hunt, so many famous warriors. Think of the ballads. Borch sounds a little bitter about it, though, and certainly doesn't see it as worthy of song.
Battle? Asked three jackdaws. It's more an act reminiscent of an autopsy or the butchery of a pig. The more I listen to you, the more you astound me. A bunch of warriors stumbling over each other to finish off a half-dead dragon that's been poisoned by some yokel. I don't know whether to laugh or puke.
Missing from all this is sorcerers, but that void is filled quickly enough. One has preceded their arrival, and with a pass, so she's already across the river, and another named Doragere appears as well. Geralt cynically assumes he's there to claim dragons' parts for elixirs, which turns out to not be the case at all. He's in fact an unusual man who believes that even monsters have a right to live, even those that kill other species. He reveals that the sorceress already across the river is Yennefer, which causes Geralt to shudder. It's clear that they must get across or miss out. After some drinks and flattery, Borch comes through with a bribe of 2.5 times what Geralt earned for killing the basilisk. This gets them across the bridge and into the action. Next, we see they've caught up to some of the would-be dragon slayers, and they're all sitting around a campfire, drinking and discussing the situation. The leader of the Crinford Reavers, Boholt, is an untrustworthy man, but experienced in such matters. He points out that dragon hunts often attract a crowd like this, but almost everyone runs off when the dragon actually appears, only to return again when it's time to claim the treasure. He points out that some not-so-decent types deem it easier to kill dragon slayers than dragons. Boholt, aware that witchers don't kill dragons, wonders aloud at Geralt's presence at all. He suggests pointedly that surely the Reavers and the Witcher won't interfere with each other. Surely. This segues into a discussion about how to split the treasure, since that's preferable to fighting over it. The dragon will be tough enough. The Dragon Slayers are adamant that the professionals, the ones actually willing to fight, should get half, and anyone else who helps gets a quarter, and the king gets the final quarter. Borch pointedly asks what portion of the reward will go to the poisoner sheepbagger. One of the Reavers says his reward is death for interfering with professionals, potentially poisoning their dragon-slaying business as well as the dragon. Geralt points out that they've been neglecting to consider the third dragon slayer, the famous knight Ike. As Bolt is explaining that he doesn't take Ike seriously, Yennefer emerges to join the fire and the discussion. She claims to be the king's representative and agrees to the terms Boholt had put forth to the others, including the added provision that the sorcerers have access to the dragon's body. She's not happy with the deal, believing that the dragon slayers are unnecessary. She mocks them, saying they'll be wishing for her help soon enough. In truth, Yennefer wants the body for herself in order to restore her fertility, lost when she became a sorceress. And Doragere wants the dragon to be killed by no one at all, so clearly he doesn't like the deal either. She leaves, and Geralt follows. They haven't seen each other since he ran off. As usual, Yennefer cuts to the chase.
Men like to see their former lovers again, to reminisce about the good old times. They take pleasure in imagining that their bygone love affairs assure them a perpetual right of possession on their ex-partners. It's good for their self-esteem. You're no exception, apparently.
He has mistaken her politeness for forgiveness, which she corrects him on quickly and surely, telling him she will forgive him never. Never. The next day, the caravan of uneasy alliances sets off. Geralt finds himself in discussion with the Chancellor Guildenstern. Like Boholt, he wonders why Geralt is here at all, but he notices the same about others as well.
I must say your presence here seems strange to me. A witcher with more scruples than there are fleas nesting in the coat of a fox. a magician who never stops spouting druidic incongruities regarding the balance of nature, a silent knight, Borch 3 jackdaws, and his escort from Zerrikania, where, as everybody knows, they make sacrifices before the effigies of dragons. And suddenly all join our hunt. It's strange, don't you find?
The reveal that Zerrikanians worship dragons is indeed what we might call a very important detail. It seems like they'd be more likely to fight for a dragon than against one. Gillenstern has a point. There are an awful lot of anti-dragon slayers and non-dragon slayers in the group. So the so-called druidic incongruities are coming from Doragere, he who believes no monster should be slain due to natural balance and ecosystems and such. Yennefer points out how unwise it is to speak as if he's planning to interfere with several groups of professional killers in the midst of making their living. Rather than taking her advice, he mocks her sterility, apparently deciding that he needs even more extremely dangerous people angry at him. Doragere leaves, prompting Geralt and Yennefer to argue with each other instead of him. Shortly thereafter, Borch asks Geralt why he's there. What's his purpose? Geralt claims he has none. He has no reason to be anywhere in particular, and that Borch is lucky to have purpose of his own. Borch begins to tell Geralt that he does have purpose after all, but the Witcher just doesn't want to hear that. At the front, they're deciding which route to take, the long way around or a bridge that Sheepdagger claims was built by trolls and is thus sturdy. With everyone debating what to do while standing still on a treacherous mountain path, it sure would be a disaster if someone started a rock slide. And that's exactly what happens. The rock slide kills a lot of soldiers and supplies, but none of the characters with names are killed, except perhaps Borch, Thea, and Vea, or so the characters think. In fact, they caused the rock slide, not wanting this dragon hunt to succeed. Several of our heroes have a close call, only to be saved by a magical rope. Geralt and Yennefer are highly annoyed to find out that, of all the people in the group, their rescuer is the ultra-zealous knight, Ike of Denizli, who proceeds to blame the rock slide on the presence of so much, as he says, vermin, including those whom he just saved. Geralt, full of pride and shame and on edge over his arguments with Yennefer, announces angrily that, as vermin, it would be better if he left. Before he can make good on that tantrum, however, Sheepdagger comes running up to declare that the impossible has been spotted. It's not the dragon they were looking for, but...
There was in this creature an ineffable grace, something feline that clearly contradicted its reptilian provenance, for it was, without a doubt, reptilian. The scales it bore gave the appearance of being finely painted on. Furiously brilliant light shone in the dragon's bright yellow eyes. The creature was most certainly gold. From the tips of its claws, planted in the earth, up to the end of its long tail that moved slowly amongst the thistles proliferating upon the height. The creature opened its big, amber, bat-like wings and remained still, looking at them with its huge golden eyes and demanding that they admire it.
And they surely do. On top of that, it can communicate via telepathy, so it is exceptional in that regard as well. The exceptions pile up further when the dragon announces an intent to engage in honorable duels with any challenger without using its flight or dragon's breath. Ike quickly accepts. Knightly one-on-one combat is exactly his specialty and his preference. He has a long list of victories over monsters, and Geralt says he's the real deal. But he's clearly no match for the Golden Dragon. It's over in seconds. Ike isn't killed, but he may never ride a horse again. Definitely not this horse, who came out even worse than his rider. With their champion defeated so anticlimactically by a dragon far tougher than the sick one they were expecting, the royal party abruptly leaves. Nightemir speaks for the first time and reveals himself to be a pretty terrible person, though perhaps not a stupid one. He judges that simply invading the country will be easier than defeating this dragon and taking its head. He's probably not wrong. Yennefer asks Geralt to kill the dragon for her. He finds this hurtful, and his response hurts her in return. He regrets it immediately, but there's little time to dwell on it or speak further. Seeing the dragon slayers preparing, Doragere steps up to defend the dragon, though he really doesn't seem to need it. Geralt and Dandelion join his side, but Yennefer turns on them with her magic, and the Reavers disable Doragere. In true, there can be only one fashion, Yennefer then proceeds to turn on the dwarves and reavers, but Yarpen Zigrin attended Torque's lead ball tossing school, and he disables her with a bullseye to the forehead. The two magicians, the Witcher and the Bard, are tied to wagons as Boholt rips open Yennefer's dress, assaults her, and promises to do worse afterwards. Jaskier, angry at her for turning on him, expecting to be killed shortly, and always crude besides, refuses to stop staring, and he's lucky Yennefer doesn't do worse to him afterwards. The dragon has become quite bored with this squabbling and waiting around and advances on the humans. Displaying further incredible agility, he easily takes out the Reavers, leaving them alive but unlikely to threaten a dragon ever again. The dwarfs are able to run away. Meanwhile, a small gray-green creature sidles up to the tied-up Yennefer. It's a hatchling, a baby dragon. It likes her, and the world turns upside down as the implications become clear. There is no hoard of treasure. The newborn is what the dragons were guarding. Though the dragon who had been poisoned was the mother, she was unable to protect her egg while in this weakened condition. But villain Trettenmirth, a.k.a. Borch 3 Jackdaws, answered the call to protect her. Order versus chaos. The villagers arrive in force, having traveled separately, and start to overwhelm the dragon. However, brave townsfolk are no match for dragon-worshipping warriors from Zerrikania wielding their famous Zerrikanian sabers, even when it's only a pair of them. They'd been hanging out nearby just in case the dragon needed help, and he did. Moved, Yennefer has a change of heart and suffers some scorching in order to free herself and lend a foot.
The wheels of the third wagon became square. The horses reared up, the wagon collapsed in on itself, and the Bearfield militiamen were ejected. Out of pure spite, Yennefer moved her leg again and, with an additional charm, transformed all of them at random into turtles, geese, millipedes, pink flamingos, or suckling pigs.
It seems spells cast by foot instead of hand have unpredictable results, but this certainly got the job done. None of those animals are threats to a baby dragon. But people who poison dragons are, and the graceful golden dragon ends the fighting by very ungracefully tearing the hapless shoemaker to bits in a manner gruesome enough that even Geralt turns away. It's personal, after all. Sheepbagger poisoned his adopted child's mother. She probably would have been next, but thanks to Yennefer's change of heart, the dragon and his champions spare her. He orders the sparing of all who remain, in fact, showing even more grace and a desire to end the killing. He has won, after all. Not just the battle, but a prize more valuable than life itself. Purpose.
It's necessary in this day and age. The creatures that you commonly call monsters have felt for some time more and more threatened by humans. They don't know how to defend themselves and they need a protector. A witcher.
And the goal at the end of the path?
Here it is. Villain Trettenmirth raised his forearm. Frightened, the young dragon started to chirp. Here is my goal, my purpose.
The dragon villain Trettenmirth, who likens himself to a witcher among dragons, is a father now. He has a child whose mother and her kind are hunted by people in great numbers coming from the south. But he's capable of protecting this adopted newborn with gray and green coloring. Not exactly a child of surprise or even a dragon of surprise, but close, within the bounds of reason.
So, wow, what a synopsis there from Aziz.
Thank you.
Big claps in the chat. Within the bounds of reason, I didn't think that pink flamingos being cast by foot magic was going to be included in The Witcher, but Andrei Sapkowski is a troll.
It's not in my translation.
Oh, yeah. You know what? That's a funny thing. We should talk about that briefly. I have this copy that we got online from a friend of ours who got a translated copy. And there are small differences like that. For example, the village is called Hollopole in my text. I changed it to Bearfield because I know that's what it says. But there's other things like that I didn't know. I didn't change because I don't know. I didn't notice the differences. So that's kind of neat that there's some slight translation differences.
But chat, also give yourselves a hand if you said villain Trettenmirth 3 times fast over and over and over while joining the read. We're going to get into our reactions now, but I did want to thank, I believe, Amy Blackfire said she signed up on Anchor and is now supporting us. So thank you very much for being added to that group, Amy. I see
the email right here. Confirmed. Yep. Thank you, Amy.
Woo! So thank you for that. We will... add that to our Dragon's Horde of support. So we're going to get into the reactions. We spoke a little bit about this on Tuesday. We usually have our own discussion, and of course we have our shared document where we put stuff and, kind of analyze what we want to go over for each podcast. But I think one thing that was super interesting that we talked about sort of Destiny, and Michal, you said you preferred this over The Last Wish, and I'm kind of there with you, because my kind of reaction of it is The Last Wish was really these origin stories. It was more about kind of learning about Geralt, and learning about the world. This one is more, I feel, about relationships and kind of moving the story forward. And then once you get into Blood of Elves, it's, the main story. So I feel like sort of Destiny is kind of a little bit of The Last Wish and a little bit of Blood of Elves, but it really has a different kind of vibe from the other two books. And I'm in agreement with Michal about, just kind of the pacing of the book is really excellent. One thing that, I really enjoyed, of course, in private chats with Aziz and Michal and some of you, is some of the lore we've been getting. Dragons, of course, are something that's super popular in all sorts of books like this. We talked a little bit about, Sapkowski taking from D&D influences, which we're going to talk about. He's, kind of inserted that a little bit into different stories. But yeah, I really like the kind of chaos versus order, and we see Geralt and Yennefer's relationship kind of start to come back and become more important. And this story is kind of like a launching point towards some of the more important storylines. We saw that a little bit with The Last Wish at the end of The Last Wish, and now this is starting to really get into some of the story and some of the real more important points that are going to kind of be hammered home through the main novel. So what are your impressions of this particular story and sort of the start of Sword of Destiny? Michal.
Oh. Yeah, I have a lot of mixed feelings on this story. I think it does a very good job of starting Geralt's arc in this book, because I do think this is a book. It's lacking the frame story that we had in The Last Wish, and I think that's explicitly because it doesn't need one. These aren't unconnected stories. They are strung together, I think, both chronologically and emotionally. There is a clear kind of path that Geralt follows, and that Yennefer also follows through the stories. And so I think this does a really good job in that, in that sense. I also love baby dragons, so that's a huge plus for it. Like if something has a baby dragon, I'm there.
People were cheering that in chat and actually spamming some dragon emojis, so it must be quite popular.
Looks like baby dragons are popular all around.
Yeah, well, people didn't like season 2 of Game of Thrones, and I was like, baby dragons, man.
Saving grace, man. Saving grace. Yeah.
It's also a really funny story. Like I don't want to ignore that point. I find I've laughed out loud reading this several times. But there's a lot of problematic stuff in here that really brings it down, and I find very uncomfortable. Just from the sexualizing of Thea and Vea to just some of the offhand things that are said. It makes me really uncomfortable. Again, there are stories that I think you would be forgiven for reading and being like, ugh, this is sexist, I'm not reading this anymore. Even though, we know that at the end of the day, Sapkowski does a lot more, deep explorations and great characterization and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. This is somewhere in the middle for me.
You also said, Sapkowski is funny. Yennefer did get sexually assaulted, which you're going to talk about. He does it in a playful way, but also it is problematic. So Michal's going to touch on that, which is a serious topic that we should discuss, of course, in the podcast. But yeah, Aziz, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I was wondering, when I read it, it doesn't make me as uncomfortable as a man, but I recognize that that's something that would these are things that would make people uncomfortable, which does in turn make me a little uncomfortable because, on behalf of other people, like that's how empathy works, I guess. And, but I also agree that it has a lot of things to balance out that makes it, doesn't erase that stuff, but it's really funny, like you say. And I love the way the themes come together. It's a great theme setup. The theme of loneliness and sterility and all these different powerful but lonely beings coming together and kind of in the middle of nowhere is really neat. I just think that's super cool and well done, and it's well hidden. And when you reread the story, knowing it's like a lot of things that are well written and well done. It's a different experience the second time through. The action is solid enough, but that's really not what makes the story. And there's good lore. There's good, as always, the dialogue is funny. And I also really liked, I had one more note here. I like the figuring out when this happens. It's kind of neat. Like the timeline in The Witcher is always a little difficult to figure out sometimes, because I think Sapkowski kind of didn't want it to be too, wanted it to be a little malleable. He wanted to give himself some room. But I feel like this is definitely before the Voice of Reason and before the first story, before The Witcher, but clearly obviously after Last Wish, because they've met. So that is a little tricky, like framing what's happened and what hasn't happened. And I think that's maybe part of what you were briefly touched on with this book being maybe a little stronger in that sense, is the structure is a little better. It's almost like The Last Wish has similar issues that the TV show has, which is why the TV show has those issues, which is hard to tell where you are in the timeline.
The TV show is like, why don't we just amp that up to 100?
Yeah, they're like, let's have it more confusing. So I agree. Like there's definitely, I agree there's some problematic stuff. And I think he tried to address some of it, but he didn't address it enough. Like he tried to make it like an inversion, like how the Zerkanians turned out to be like high-ranking, like priest warriors, or I don't know what to call them. They're not typical for their culture, but that doesn't change what you said. It just means there's a little more to them. But doesn't actually flip anything. It's just like a little more depth or whatever. So pretty strong. And I love that there was, just as a side note, there was more seafood soup, which always makes me smile.
I think one of the themes that we have to talk about, that really starts, and I think is probably one of the strongest themes that strengthens this book and the series as a whole, is the theme of family. Because towards the end, you really start to see, at the start of the story, you see kind of everybody's scattered and they're kind of doing their own thing. And Aziz, you mentioned loneliness, and you really see Borch at the end kind of outline like how important, like, because he has this intuition about Geralt and Yennefer's relationship and how special it is. And for a golden dragon, for something that magical and mythical to make a statement like that, it's like Sapkowski is really throwing it in our faces saying, hey, pay attention to this, Yeah. Because at the start,
it's a word of God.
Yeah, it's a real authority. It's really important, because I think this is an important societal function, to be very aware that you do not have to you don't have to have a child come from your body to be a parent. Like adoption, that's a good thing. Like adoption is a wonderful thing that it exists. I mean, obviously, ideally, no kid ever has to be adopted, but this is the real world where that things happen and kids are orphaned. And that's a person that adopts in a lot of ways, I think, is braver than someone that does it on their own. Not that I'm criticizing by any means, but I think it's just a really important message to say, look, adoption is parenting. It's important. It's real. And that's a good purpose in life to have. Just because you can't have kids from your own body doesn't mean you can't have basically that same thing, et cetera. So yeah, I think that's huge. And coming from the Game of Thrones world, I think that's important too, because there's lots of like adoptions and maybe adoptions and false parent, not necessarily people, or people who are not necessarily the parents of the person they're raising. And, doesn't undermine anything if they're not the real parent. It's still like your parent is the person who raised you, not, there's the sire, your sire and your mother and father are different things, right?
We're going to talk about kind of the mirroring that happens, obviously, I'm actually going to point out a couple of quotes in chat that really kind of highlight this, but, a mirror can take out a basilisk, which can turn you into stone. But we see how important the relationship between Yennefer and Geralt is. But also, we got to remember that Geralt, not too many spoilers, ends up going to Ciri, and Ciri is in her own right unique like a golden dragon. She is this thing of destiny. So I think that is something that we got to discuss. But I just want to highlight a couple of really awesome comments in chat, because you guys are having a great discussion, and this kind of highlights to some of the points we were talking about. The world of the Witcher isn't black or white, Yormi says. It's gray, but without black or white, there can't be gray. Basically, without Geralt and Yennefer, Ciri is incomplete. And then Amy follows this up perfectly, and she says, yin and yang is also hierarchical, with male being over the female. A lot of Westerners misunderstand them as equal, so this works for Geralt and Yennefer as well. So, like I said, talking about that theme of family, and then we kind of see a little bit of foreshadowing with, not yet, but Geralt going to become a parent later on with the Golden Dragon taking the child, and that's kind of a little bit of foreshadowing that it's going to happen with Geralt later on. So there's some really cool groundwork that Andrzej Sapkowski lays with this story.
That's a really good take about Geralt and Yennefer, yin and yang, because of their coloring too. Geralt's white and Yennefer's
white
the
of
black.
hair,
Yeah.
raven of hair, yeah.
Wow, that fits great. Yeah.
And Ciri being the gray, kind of the
yeah.
Kind of what it feels right now.
And
That's
her
awesome.
personality is like a little bit of osmosis she takes on from both of them, like the sassiness of Yennefer, but also the practicality of Geralt. So I thought that, I mean, you guys are awesome, but those are some of the ones that I wanted to highlight from chat that I had to say that was really relevant. So yeah, we all really enjoyed the story, obviously.
I like this. We have this series of takes on Geralt's regular recurring mansplaining, which is really pretty like bigger than normal this time, huh?
Michal?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just love he's literally, I mean, and it's not his fault because he doesn't know that he's talking to a little dragon, but he's actually dragon-splaining what dragons are like to an actual dragon.
Dragon-splaining. So in the last wish, he magic-splained magic to a sorceress.
Fertility to a birth, like a doula, basically.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And
yeah.
He's consistent.
He is.
Well, one thing that we'll get into is I really like all of like kind of the different perspectives of everybody's perception. Like Yaskier Dandelion is like, oh, I want to write a ballad about this, and Yarpin and them are like, yes, treasure, and Geralt's like, what the fuck? I don't want to kill this dragon. and then like Yennefer's like, I want this for my fertility. So like there's like it's like so chaotic. Everybody's goals are not aligned at all. And in the end, like basically none of them really get what they want, which is hilarious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that goes to a very poignant thing, right? Because everybody does have a reason to be there except Geralt, and he kind of extrapolates like, why am I here to why am I here? And like then it becomes that whole like moody section where he's just like, damn, I don't know what my purpose is in life.
But then even the
Yennefer's like, shut up, you whiny baby.
And then but then like the last line of the short story is so important because I mean we see Taya and Vea say he is the most beautiful, and we're wondering like what are they talking about? Like are they like really into Borch? Like what's this polyamorous relationship going on here? And then we find out that it's a matter of perspective that Geralt gains, which is sometimes can be the most important thing in life. You might have thought one thing and gained this perspective, and it completely changes the way you go about things in life. So I think that that's something that's super powerful for Geralt and kind of humbles him because he has to learn how to treat people that love him and learn how to express himself better, right? He's in his shell. So I think that that's kind of, while Geralt doesn't really have a reason to be there, he finds a reason to start moving forward with some of the things in his life that he's been apprehensive about.
That's a good way to put it. I think maybe you could express it as with Yennefer, he has the semblance of love, but hasn't convinced himself that's what it is. I think he part of him has these doubts. He feels unlovable, and so with Yennefer, sometimes I think he feels like it's just they're just going through the motions, like it's just lust. Maybe he doesn't fully understand. He hasn't embraced that it's more than that. It is more than that, but I don't know. Sometimes I think he doubts that, and then he very suddenly realizes how wrong he's been, and then somehow makes his way back to thinking he's unlovable again. What I think is super interesting about that is that it's like a stepping stone towards Ciri, who he doesn't have that doubt with her eventually. Eventually it's like, okay, with a child he's caring for, a lot of those doubts kind of go away, because with a child you have a sense of honesty. Like a young child isn't capable of full-on deception or in the back of Geralt's mind, Yennefer could be having one over on him. She's deceptive and intelligent and has been around. But like with Ciri, there's just no chance, right? She's too young. So he can trust that. And I think that's really nice.
It's also a matter of shifting priorities. Like Geralt realizes that if he doesn't protect Ciri, that these really bad people could get a hold of her and do very bad things to her. And he may want to do other things, but he may realize that keeping Ciri safe is more important than some of the other things in his life. He puts that, he starts to recognize that this is the most important thing, as opposed to like his own selfish desires. You know what I mean? And I think that's when he starts to really become the lovable Geralt that we all know. Yeah. So yeah, shall we jump into some themes and lore and all of that?
Yeah, we've got this quote from the dragon-splaining quote here.
Okay. Across the seas in Ophir and Zanguebar, there are white horses with black stripes. I've never seen those either, but I know that they exist. The golden dragon is a myth, a legend, like the phoenix. Phoenixes and golden dragons do not exist. Thea, leaning on her elbows, looked at him curiously. You certainly know what you're talking about. You're a witcher, said Borch, drawing some more beer from the small keg. However, I think any myth, any legend, can contain a grain of truth that sometimes can't be ignored.
Aha.
Like me sitting right here in front of you.
A grain of what's that? Another reference to Novellen posters, I think. That's what that
is. Put them up, Michal.
Never.
It's kind of the inversion of the lesson at the beginning of the story, when they're joking about how you need a mirror to kill a basilisk, which I believe at some point in the main series that gets expanded on, how Geralt specifically refers to that being a legend. But it's said witchers prefer to break the mirror over the basilisk's head because it's not as effective. Yeah, he's like, how do you fight a basilisk with a mirror? He's like, well, if you smash it over the face with it.
Well, it's kind of basically a nod to how hard they are to kill and how it doesn't, you know what I mean? Like it's like difficult to kill. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's kind of like the opposite, whereas like that, maybe there was a grain of truth from that story, but maybe not. But in this case, there is. So it's kind of neat that way. In that we have kind of a neat. Last time in The Last Wish, we had this cool theme merging where the herb lore really merged well with the main themes of the story. Here, it's kind of similar, but instead of herb lore, it's dragon lore, but like the perception of dragons, the legend of dragons, and like the stuff that Geralt's talking about, and how that turns into reality, and how that filters the lens of characters' beliefs within the story.
Yeah. No, I was just listening to you. Sorry, I was just like enthralled. I was like, yeah. Yes, continue.
And we have this awesome, like, Michal, you brought this up when we were talking offline about how it's also like a reverse buildup where we hear these stories about dragons, and then Geralt's like, well, red dragons are actually brown, and green dragons are really gray. And then but then we have an actual head to heels, tip of the tail, tip of the talons, eyeballs even are golden. And it's like, no, this thing is pure gold.
And I love that, because it's like, it really is kind of returning the magic. A lot of The Witcher kind of does, I guess bring down your like the magic to kind of a more realistic level. Yeah. Sorry, you can hear that. Hang on. One second.
I call this like the Witcher version of Strange.
Okay, this is a better recording spot, but it's not as quiet. Yes, right. So we're returning magic to, to these things like, and not just in a little way, not just in like, oh, love is magic or whatever. It's just like huge honking, miraculously golden dragon. I really love that kind of, because Geralt is kind of taking that path also, right? From almost like an atheistic, like nihilistic belief in his life, to like believing in possibility, and that's like a huge theme in the story and in this book, really, because he starts off believing, in that frame of mind where it's like, what am I doing here? I don't have a future, whatever. He doesn't think that he thinks that the limits of his own possibility are extremely close.
Limits of possibility being a great name for this short story, which we discussed.
Yes.
Yeah.
we uniformly liked it better than The Bounds of Reason.
Yeah, for those aren't clear, that is the alternate name of this story. Like that's a different translation, which we think is a better translation. To be clear, that's The Limits of Possibility, or The Limits of the Possible.
Michal, you make a really good point, because Geralt is kind of always, grappling with this idea of destiny, right? Like, what does that really mean? And, to kind of use Song of Ice and Fire as a reference, like George R. R. Martin uses magic and all of these fantastical things, but there's a clear consequence to all of these things if you ignore them. You know what I mean? And we kind of start to see that a little bit in The Witcher too, even though Sapkowski does it in a more inverted and hilarious way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I just like the idea that, like, I guess what Geralt realizes is that when you come up against limits, it's not that limits aren't going to exist, but maybe it's not a sign that it's time to stop moving. It's a sign that it's time to go in a different direction.
Oh.
And that's what he and Yennefer do together, right? Like they decide to, like, she gives up her, doesn't, I guess necessarily we know, give up her idea of fertility, but she kind of gives up the idea that, like, I must get this dragon and it will pay for this, and that's the only way I can be happy, and it turns out that if she just walks in this different direction with Geralt for a while, they're both gonna become the parents of Ciri.
It's really interesting that it's called The Bounds of Reason, because their minds are expanded. Like, they have this very closed view of what they view their limits of possibility as, like where they're going in life and what they think they should be in life, these kind of parameters. And we see, like, Yennefer is dead set on this idea and killing a gold dragon, and then she completely changes her mind when she sees the child of a dragon and moves to protect it. So we see these kind of ideas that they have in their head being changed when the situations are and the stakes are much higher.
Yeah. And I'd add to that too. It's interesting that Geralt is pretty much an exception himself. Like, he's the most outstanding Witcher. He survived more Trial of the Grasses stuff than anyone else. They experimented on him greater. So he's kind of the limits of the possible. And he is an example of the limits being pushed. Maybe it wasn't a good limit to push, but he's proof that there is more. There's what people can conceive of is maybe not the actual limit, and maybe there's a lesson within that too. Yennefer maybe is something along those lines as well. There's she may be a little less unique among sorceresses in terms of, like, she's more powerful than most of them, but she doesn't have the, like, outstanding white hair or anything like that really makes her just, like, stand out in the crowd. But still, she's also very much an exception.
I think Yennefer makes herself an exception. Like,
yeah,
like Geralt is exceptional because of his, his body and what he was able to endure, and he's obviously a great, unique person also. But, like, Yennefer is just like just deliberately as unique as possible. I mean, like, the first time we met her, right? She was like, I'm not listening to either the Magicians Guild or the laws of the city. Like, she just is a rule unto herself.
Yeah. I like this note one of y'all wrote here about Borch argues that being singular, being unique is good. Like Geralt sees it as a point of loneliness. And that's Borch is trying to like, hey, look, man, you know, it's a good point you made earlier about you run into this limit of thinking, well, I'm alone. Well, maybe he should change direction on that thought process and think about the things that make it good. And that like Borch's attitude is better in this regard, I guess. And maybe that's a lesson for Geralt.
It's funny because he's a golden dragon, something that is incredibly rare and unique, yet he likes to polymorph into a human, and he likes humans. I think it's because he thinks that their possibility is limitless, like the possibility for love and all of these other things. He believes in them, yet they do bad things. You know what I mean? He still has that belief that they can be good.
It's similar to Geralt himself, right? Geralt, like very often he comes off as someone who just hates people, but he you know, clearly risks his life for them. Even when he says it's only for money, sometimes we know that's not true. He's clearly got more good guy in him than he likes to admit.
Oh man, I would love to know what Geralt's like Myers-Briggs.
Well, he's definitely an eye.
Definitely an eye.
Back, guys, I'm having allergies. Just go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's also a protector, hardcore. So
yeah. So he's probably not a J because he tries not to judge too much. But,
right.
But he might. Yeah. I think he's right on the cusp of T and F.
Yeah.
I'm sort of describing myself. I realize these are the letters that I am. While Kyle's gone, you want to read this quote? This is a really good
absolutely. This is like a pretty depressing quote. This is kind of the nadir of Geralt's experience in this story.
Yeah.
I walk in the column because I'm only a servile golem, only a strand of oakum carried by the wind on the highway. Where should I go? Tell me, for what purpose? In this company, there are plenty of people to talk to. Some don't even cut short their conversations when I approach them. Those that don't like me tell me to my face rather than talking behind my back. I accompany them for the same reason that I went with you to the Bargeman's Inn. Because it's all the same to me. I'm not expected to be anywhere in particular. There's nothing for me at the end of the road.
Yeah, we got to keep in mind that he's just argued with Yennefer when he says that, so he's particularly down. He's particularly bitter in the moment, but still, those are like real feelings coming to the surface for him. And boy, that is really sad, isn't it? I mean, he's talking about like, well, one reason I'm here is this, at least people here will talk to me. Like, oh God.
Yeah.
It's like, even if they're rude to me, at least they'll speak to me. Like,
I mean, it's very much like killing time, right? Like, it's just, you know, like it's very, and I mean, I think that's the whole point of this book is taking Geralt from a place where he has no reason to exist and landing him in a place where he does.
Oh, yeah. Because that is like, and that's a really well said, because here at the beginning is when he's most lonely, probably, and by the end, of course, is when he's, you know, there's Ciri. So
yeah,
it's funny how we kind of have this unspoken rule here in this show that we don't talk about what's coming except that Ciri is coming. It's like, well, we can't just not talk about Ciri. Like, sorry if that's a spoiler, but I'm pretty sure most of you have at least seen the show or have already read all the books. So there's a few of you maybe who haven't seen the show, but yeah, Ciri's coming, and we're not going to get into too many details because that is a spoiler, but we can't not mention that that's going to happen because it's just too important.
Their relationship is the most important relationship in the whole series.
Yeah, I agree. It's very true.
A lot of people in the comments are making parallels to like Mandalorian and to Wolverine. And like, I love that because that is, I actually was like thinking about this last night and I'm like, I have such a type. Like, this is ridiculous. Big, strong, protect little, small with powers. And like, that's it. Like, Geralt does it. Mando does it. Wolverine does it. There's more, I think, but it's.
The Kurosawa-esque lone wolf and cub narrative where you see.
And that like breaking down the barriers of like the small, cute thing. Like getting through the gruff exterior.
We will.
Brian Burns said, "Who's Ciri?"
One thing that we will talk more towards the end of the podcast is the difference between the book and the show. But I think, you know, the title being Rare Species is something really interesting, bringing up the bullet point of Wolverine and his loneliness. And he knows that, him being interacting with normal people is going to create issues. And Geralt inserting himself into all these situations, knowing there's going to be issues all the time. He tries to, take the path less traveled, tries not to get into politics and all of these other things that are going on in the continent. So that's a really, really great comparison. I saw that mentioned by multiple people in chat, and I thought, the fact that they're both mutants is another great parallel.
Yeah. I took a film class at Florida State. We did like a male, like the teacher had us watch like a movie that was centered around like a tropey woman situation, and then the opposite, that the tropey man, like this kind of trope. And we watched Kindergarten Cop, which is very much this trope, the big tough guy that learns to like be a father. That movie was surprisingly entertaining.
Well, it's part of it's part of the archetypal structure of the hero's journey too, of redemption, right? Like getting, we see with Geralt, we talked about how important his relationship is with women and how hard it is for him to love, but this is a really, really, really huge part of his story and how he grows as a person and as a man, right? Like it's for him to understand the world. He comes to, because of their love, understand himself more, and that's a really big part of progress and moving forward in life. So having them, he learns a lot from women. Let's just say that.
That is true.
Yeah. So Michal, you have this point about magical Darwinism here. Let's get into that. I think that's really interesting.
So part of the reason the story is confusing is because there's a lot of philosophy going on at the same time, and not all of it is connected, and not all of it is important is as important as the rest of it. So I think this is one of the less important. It's like kind of a red herring, but definitely we have that conversation with Dorgare and Yennefer, with Geralt just listening in, being like. So like Yennefer is arguing that dragons have to be eliminated because they are the only kind of the apex predator to humans. And if you can't have humanity living in towns, which you need for propagation of the species, then humanity will die out, and dragons are the only thing that can stop that. This comes across as enormous projection on her part, because she's like, a woman should bear a child once a year and blah blah blah, and it's like, whoa. It's just not subtle at all. Like, we know exactly where your head is at. And Dorgray, I think, makes his best point of the story, where he laughs at her and he's like, hi, remember disease? Remember how shitty the living situation is in these cities that you think are so important, and how like high infant mortality is. So it's interesting because he argues the opposite point, that like nothing should be killed at all. And then Geralt, I think, kind of represents like the middle way, which is sort of like, well, we might need to keep some of these things under control. Hence, like, I'm not going to tell a mom that her child who was devoured by a basilisk should be like happy about that. But there is a certain idea of like you can't just eradicate the enemy. Like that's just not feasible. And I think that's why Villain Trenton brings up his like Witcher of the monsters thing, that there like has to be a balance. There has to be a certain degree of allyship.
Order versus chaos.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like so it's not really that the fittest survive. You have to kind of work together for general survival. And obviously there's going to be consequences to that. Because life is life, but
Yeah, I think it redefines what fittest means. It doesn't define fit based on strength, but on some semblance of combination of worthiness and worthiness not defined by strength, but defined by your value to other people, or of course your ability to survive on your own, I suppose. But in a community setting, your value to the community is more important than your survival, your ability to survive on your own.
Doesn't that idea kind of crystallize about the idea of power and like because we see like on another level, I know this is kind of completely unrelated, but like Stregobor tries to eliminate all the women with magic, and we see kind of the hierarchy of male sorcerers and female sorcerers going on. It's kind of this thing going on too, and we see that it kind of just, you know, we see all this mirroring throughout the story. Doesn't that kind of make sense too? Like this idea of like where power lies.
Yeah, it really does. That's true. That's a good point. Because you're right, because the way power is exercised, it's the same thing. It's like, well, how do we define the fittest? If this is the strong, the fittest survive. Well, if we define fittest as morally fit, that's one thing. If we define it as just pure strength, then that's not good. But
I mean, that sort of is a really interesting way of looking at the party, the dragon hunting party, right? Because you have Ike, who represents like the moral way of doing things, supposedly, and you know, then you have like Boholt and his people who are doing this like for like brute strength and whatever, and then you have the dwarves who are kind of more like practical and like we want to get the treasure and whatever. Although their aims kind of blend in with Boholt's. But like then you have the dragon, who is like objectively the most powerful. Like it is the apex, and he's the one. Villain Trentonworth is the one who decides that like, you know, I'm not going to exert my power just because I can, you know, like he doesn't, he takes out Ike and the others, like, but he doesn't fly and he doesn't, you know, use his fire or whatever. And at the end, he's like, I'm the one who's going to say we're stopping the killing. Like even Taya and Vea, who are like head and shoulders above everyone else and killing pretty much, you know, he stops that. So I think that is like kind of a way into that idea also, that like, you know, just because you are physically the most powerful doesn't mean that others don't also deserve to be on that plane.
Well, I think it's really interesting because people are looking for this wealth. Obviously that's power. Money is power. But I think the lesson that Borch is trying to teach is like how fragile life is. Like, look, his partner is dead. He's got a baby dragon. Like we talked about this privately and laughed about how he could have just like nucleared everyone and all those fights. Like he's just like, you know, throwing his tail around and stuff like that. But he's really trying to teach a moral lesson. And that's why I think you made such a great point on that, is he's like the like morality of power.
And going back to what you said about this like being like a traveling village, Michal, that's something I was really trying to get at when we were writing this episode. Like because Sapkowski's clearly trying to make that point where it takes all kinds. Like even the worst people in this group are providing some value. Like Ike may be like kind of a jerk, but he saved them. Like he stuck to his principles. Boholt is an awful man, but if you point him in the right direction and just stick him, like give him the job of fighting dangerous monsters, that's a useful thing. Like he and his people going through all of Geralt says that he and the Reavers killed every giant centipede in Redania, which that's a useful service. Like these are assholes, but that's a good thing that they did, right? So I like that. That's a really good way to put it. And this is just like a traveling village. And I love too, the royals were useless. Like, right?
Aziz, we also talked about Ike and his xenophobia. He's like throwing out words like vermin, you know, and I like that. Yeah, that's like really terrible. And then he throws this magical elven rope and does like probably the most courageous thing out of the whole group. You know what I mean? So it's like I think this story really kind of highlights, like the chat says, the yin and yang of people, the duality, the mirroring, the two sides of everyone. Like you could choose a really bad path or you could choose a good path. You just have to open your eyes to the different limits of possibility.
Yeah. Nice.
And I just want to give a shout out to some more people in chat. Helen, my sister from another mister, love ya. Nice to see ya. Hey, Tinkerbell, another one of the channel supporters. Macro, I see Liat, I believe.
Hey, Liat Rubenfeld's there.
And
cool.
Just Rick Hoppy, just wanted to give you guys a shout out. Thanks everyone for joining us on this Thursday, and Anthony as well. Yeah. So sorry about that.
One other point, backing up just a little bit, talking about Yennefer's thing about dragons and apex predators. I was wondering if we have examples of that. She says dragons are a threat to cities, which basically no other monster is. Like, even a vampire doesn't pose that kind of threat to a city because it's only ever going to kill a few people at a time. It's never going to just destroy the whole settlement.
If we actually get math on that.
Yeah. So this is actually a theme that comes back later during the main series. So without spoiling it, just it's important that this groundwork is being set here. But do we know? Does that actually happen? Do dragons destroy cities? I mean, I know they're capable of it, but is that actually a thing that we know of happening?
I think there's stories about red dragons being like voracious and aggressive, and because Geralt kind of teases like what the different dragons are like, right? I'd have to go back and check on that, but it's really interesting, the fact that this golden royal dragon is, something that could destroy them all is trying to teach everybody a lesson, essentially, and not destroy. He could easily destroy the village, right?
Yeah, just easily. Like, he could have just come back and been like, look, these people poisoned my adopted kid's mother. I have, by human standards, he has reason for revenge. Like, in this culture, his reasoning would be accepted by a lot if he were a human, We would disagree, but
as people are saying that the pensive dragon, I mean, it does this, you know what I mean? That kind of does make sense. The dragon is pensive. He's not going in there and lighting everybody on fire.
Yeah, he's capable of tearing you down, but mostly he likes to talk and think and
have beers.
Have beers, yeah.
He kind of reminds me of Spike from Buffy in that scene where he's just like, have you had curly fries? Why would we wipe out humanity? Like,
what's next? We talked about Nidomir briefly. Let's cross him off the list. He's a useless royal and just a terrible person, but kind of a fitting representation, I suppose, of what this is. He's a good example of this dynamic of power, the opposite of how to wield power. Like, this guy only cares about himself. He's he doesn't deign to speak to other people, and he's really just all these horrible, all these anti-communal qualities. So,
and Yennefer is using him as an opportunity to get things she wants. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so is Gillenstern and all these people, they're like, it's weird that you're sort of like a little bit pro Boholt in that it's like more democratic, that like, I do think the people who do the work should get more of a share than the king who sits on his ass and, rides along. But like, I don't know. He's also a really bad person, so I don't 100% agree with him either. But I think Nidomir is like interesting because when you don't have any sense of him through the story, and then when he does finally decide to talk, like you're like, oh, okay, like he speaks with like purpose, and he like has his own ideas, and he's like, I've learned much, and I'm like, oh, maybe this is a good kid, and then it's like, oh no, he got all the bad, wrong ideas from this, and like just it really culminates where he's just like, I don't need the dragon, I just need the princess. I don't even need the princess, Amelie, or I just need her womb, and then I will poison her after she bears me an heir. And I'm like, that's the number one way to get in my shit list. So.
It kind of goes to this idea of the mirroring. We see we're shown this one person by Sapkowski, and then we see the reverse of that person. Like, Nidomir is out there. He's like, oh, I need to get that princess, so I got to kill the dragon. And he's like, I don't think I need that much after gaining a little perspective. And we see that with almost all of the characters. Like, their initial idea of what they want really changes after their encounters.
His perspective turns, and I could just send in the troops. He's like, I'll just waste a different group of. I'll just slaughter a different set of peasants instead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does he say? Like, he'll just behead all of them until they start agreeing with him, or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, he's just like, I know he's extremely like, he's got that extremely gross pragmatic. He's like, he's the opposite of power. He's like, I can get away with this. Who's going to stop me? I think I sort of missed that. I sort of missed how well that fits into this theme, but it's coming up quite well here as we're recording, so that's nice.
Yeah. he's very Joffrey, like.
Oh yeah! Wow.
Oh yeah.
Well, without a mother to like sort of control him.
Yeah.
But Cersei's bad too, so
If he's Joffrey, who is Yarpen?
Good question.
Ron?
No.
That's a
I mean,
good
I
one.
hate Bronn and I like Yarpen, but there is some similarity there.
A sellswordy vibe, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cell sortie, but like if he was, but with the whole like has to be one because he's from a separate culture that isn't accepted. Like it's like if he was, it's like if a Song of Ice and Fire had like equivalent, like yeah, like if it was like a sellsword Cranagman or something.
Yeah.
Wow, today's episode is off the rails. I'm loving this.
So,
If I could just pop in my other bad things since we
Do
talked
it.
about Nightmare.
yeah, I think this is a good segue to it. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're in that spot.
So the first one I wanted to Nightmare is bad, but not as bad from a literary perspective because I think the narrative is very much like judging him too.
Mhm.
So Dandelion early in the story mentioned when he's talking about what happened with the dragon, he's like, oh yeah, we sent, the village idiot and some other person who was not fully facultied, to go check if the dragon was dead. And then we built them a small but pleasing burial mound after. And like, ha ha ha, they die. That's great. But like also even worse, the mentally disabled person that they send is referred to as the son of a woodcutter's R word that I'm not going to use, daughter, by her rape from a bunch of pikemen and like from some war. And it's like, like just kind of like spoken very jovially. And like, at least that's how I read it. And like, it's just like, that's a horrible crime and a tragedy. And like, it shouldn't be confused with humor. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's like locker room humor, which means some of the worst kind.
Yeah.
Like soldiers, like, yeah, I agree. That made me uncomfortable too.
Yeah.
I think I like to think that Sapkowski wouldn't write it that way today, but I don't actually know that for sure. But yeah, that's just my wish. That's just my wish.
Yeah, and then the sexual assault of Yennefer by Boholt, which we get like a little bit of a judgment on when Geralt, says that he's going to hunt Boholt to the ends of the earth if he rapes Yennefer. But Dandelion is just like, nah, man, this is my payment for like being dragged on this stupid journey. It's like, dude, you wanted to come. Like you were on this journey to begin with.
Yeah,
and you got left behind because you had to sleep with a widow. Like,
Yeah.
Sapkowski kind of writes it in a like slapstick humor way.
Yeah, and I do not like that.
Yeah, I think it might be arguably Jaskier's lowest point in the entire series.
I think that might be fair to say. I mean, he goes pretty low sometimes, but like, I think this might be. He's definitely better in the rest of this book.
Yeah, like the argument would be that he's really mad at Yennefer because she's the reason he's tied up, and he expects that he's about to be killed. But that doesn't really make it okay.
Yeah,
it's just that's just more background. Shall we move?
We're all in agreement on those are bad things.
Yeah, no argument here. I fully agree. Yeah, definitely. Do we have any more on that, or shall we move on to some character talk?
Yes.
Let's do characters.
Cool. We've got a quote.
Okay. Hang on. Sorry. There's more background.
I'm scrolling back down to where we are in the document too. I was like way off.
Okay.
You got it?
Can you guys hear this? Should I wait?
No, you're good.
Oh, look, hang on. Let's just real quick. Macrophage says the name Nidamir means a person who won't give you peace.
Wow.
Huh. That does seem to fit pretty well.
Especially with his final statements.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, Michal, you're good to go?
All right. It's hard for me to say, Geralt, in what circumstances our respective forefathers had their first meeting, but I know that for dragons, nothing is more loathsome than man. Man awakens in dragons an instinctive and irrational hatred. I'm an exception. To me, you are quite likable. So this is basically Villain Trent Mirth saying that, like, he's one of those people who keeps cockroaches for pets.
Humans are puppies.
Yeah, but he sees them as puppies. Like all the other dragons are like, that's a cockroach, and he's like, oh, look at the cute little human.
I wonder how much of that is perspective, right? He can turn into a human, whereas other dragons can't. So he can actually walk and be among them and be treated like one of them. So he can, like, imagine a person that could turn into a dragon would be more accepted amongst dragons and maybe not loathe them as much. I think that's kind of a neat little perceptional angle to take there.
Yeah. I think he has confidence that they won't kill him because he's a dragon.
Yeah. He also just knows, he's like, they're not going to be able to.
Try it, guys. But I think this idea of like humans being disgusting is brought up later with elves, I think, or like the very high elves. Maybe I'm thinking of something else, but like I have this weird memory of like Ciri confronting this at some point.
Oh, interesting. I'm not sure. I don't know if I can think of what you're referring to, but we'll have to keep an eye out for it.
Well, tell me in the chat if I'm totally making this up.
Cool. So I want to go through a couple of quick parallels between Geralt and Borch as far as him being like a dragon witcher. First of all, the adoption via payment thing is huge. The Child of Surprise somewhat parallel, even down to this baby dragon being gray-green, like Ciri herself has gray hair with green eyes. Sterile, uniquely colored, both of them, right? Extremely quick, like unreasonably quick, graceful. This Kyle, you had this great point about the trial of grasses inversion. It's not, Borch doesn't go through a trial of grasses, but the other dragon eats all this poison, and it's kind of like it doesn't make her stronger, but it is kind of like the theme is similar.
Well, Geralt also has, without spoiling too much, we'll see some of this in the show once they introduce the other Witchers. They kind of talk about this, but the trauma from seeing other people die from the trial of the grasses, we kind of see villain Trendemirth when we see his partner die, and obviously, Geralt is given up by his mother, but he's very close to Eskel and Lambert, and Lambert speaks up quite a few different times about him not having power over being a Witcher and him having to be subjected to basically experiments and having trauma from that. So it's kind of connected to that, I think.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. And neither of them like to kill people, but absolutely will. They won't hesitate if the situation demands it, but they don't want to do it. Right? They don't like killing people. They don't like killing in general, but they're really good at it if the situation demands it. And also, just the concept of what was I going to say? Just rereading the story, like trying to put yourself in Borch's perspective and thinking about how he's like that at one point they're just talking about like, I'm going to take the tail, I'm going to take the leg, like they're just like, like, how does that, from him sitting there, like, that's got to be awful. Just hearing them just talk about how, like, imagine if you're sitting around a campfire, people talking about like what part of the human body to cut off to keep as a trophy or eat,
Like, you are a human body.
And it's funny. It's funny in the show, they really highlighted when Borch gives the teeth to the dwarves. He's like, hey, take these, and Yarpen's like, yes, teeth.
That's actually a good segue to something that I think is maybe a little confusing, because in the show it seems like they made villain Trendemirth the mate of Merg de Braque, who dies, but in the book Merg de Braque doesn't die. She flies away and escapes in order to heal, which presumably is going to take a long time, which is part of why she gives her child up. She's just not capable of handling it because she's so weakened. But they're explicitly not mated in the books, where it's not necessarily, I'm not sure if it's clear in the show, but I think they sort of gave that vibe. I got that vibe. I'm not sure if everybody else did, but it was kind of like, rereading the story is what cleared that up for me. It's like, okay, no, they're definitely not mates. He is a protector to her and adopted her child.
I think the reason they did that in the show is because they wanted to do the parallel of Geralt getting to Ciri at the end, and obviously like Ciri losing her parents and the people that she loved being alone. So they wanted to focus on that loneliness more, I think.
I think you're right. I think the dragon, the Merg de Braque, is the parallel to Calanthe / Pavetta, who dies leaving Ciri alone, has no parents. Where in this case, it's like the dragon's mom is out there somewhere which maybe the intention there was for it to be more like Geralt, because Geralt's mother might still be out there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Who should we talk about next?
Did we have more to say about Yarpen? Oh, Michal, you have a good note about Yarpen here.
Yeah, so I mean, Yarpen is an interesting. All the dwarves are interesting to me because there's definitely like a not subtle Jewish parallel, I think, in a lot of what they talk about. I mean, like he uses the word pogrom, which is at least in America a very like Jewish specific word of an attack against Jews. And Yarpen has a whole speech about how he has to like behave in a certain way, because if he doesn't, then people will start talking about how like shitty dwarves are, and like they'll just kick off another pogrom somewhere, which is super important for also way later in the series. But yeah, I mean, like I thought this was also an echo of the like singularity like idea that there is sometimes a bad thing in being unique, and that you can face hatred and you need to find ways to protect yourself against the majority, sometimes in like uncomfortable ways, because, you know, otherwise they'll just kill you.
Yeah, you need to be danger. You need to like look like you're not easy to pick on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the dwarves certainly give that off. They're not easy to pick on. Everyone knows that. Later we get into stories about halflings, right? And they look easy to pick on, but they're not easy to pick on.
No, they're not.
If they were, they wouldn't be around probably.
Yeah. I also, I mean, I struggle with Yarpen a little bit just because he's so mean to Yennefer.
Yeah,
and like
really
we just don't really see why. But like, you know, he's funny. Like he's a great character. But he is a little confusing to me in that like he's like, oh, she smells. Like, what's that disgusting smell? I'm like, oh my God, like calm down, dude. Like if you have a problem with her, talk to her. But
what was that line about a horse? It was like, that's a horse riding a horse or whatever they said.
Yeah, it's really mean.
Yeah,
and it hurts her. Like you can tell.
Yeah. It's almost like the hatred that Jaime gives Brienne of Tarth in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's like they actually do respect her, but they don't want to show it. They're never going to show it, but they hate her. Yeah, it's respect and hate combined. Yeah.
I think it's the idea that she's a sorceress and that she does have power. Maybe that's why like she's like the hierarchy of things, and dwarves, you know, like think of themselves as powerful fighters and stuff like that. So
the same reason you make fun of kings and people just have all this power, because they have authority over you.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, he also like, you know, it's not like she doesn't try and double cross them. She does.
Yeah, that's true. She pretty much turns on everyone at some point here. But then she turns on her own original intent, so she comes around. Doragere, interesting story about him. Apparently that name is a common Basque last name, which translates to High Tower for our Game of Thrones fans there. Any wonder if that's intentional. I like how he's another example of just all these sorcerers, despite their power and their long lifespans, they're still very human. They all have like very notably human flaws. None of them are like super wise or it's another thing we get into later. It's a good setup for more world building that has a larger role in the story later, especially I think in Season of Storms probably, but just in other places too. Just the fact that these, no matter how old they are, no matter how powerful they are, they're still very flawed people, in some ways more so than normal folk.
He's such a nerd.
Yeah, he really is. He's like the guy from Grandma's Boy, the really talented developer that just thinks he's better than everyone else.
Wow, that's a great comparison.
What was that guy's name?
I never would have thought we would be making a Grandma's Boy Witcher comparison.
And we already had Kindergarten Cop. We got to just keep
only on the podcast surprise people.
So I think we covered Nidamir already. Teave, I think we probably covered them. I just wanted to add that imagine Jaskier going to Zerrikania and them thinking like he's typical of all Nordlings, and that's kind of what I think. The Zerrikanians are probably not normal for their region either.
Well, one thing that we should mention is we've had a lot of characters that don't return later on with a exception of a few people like Stregobor. Yarpen, no, without spoiling too much, Yarpen is a returning character, and he does play a pretty decent part. So that's something that you can look forward to if you haven't read it.
Yeah. We'll also say that a few other of these characters will pop up again, a little or not. But that's all we'll say on that. One who's definitely not coming back is Sheepbagger, because that dude's quite dead.
Well, they weren't looking, so maybe.
Can I get a hand count in chat? Who is happy for the death of Sheepbagger?
Well, I have mixed feelings.
What?
Yeah,
he's terrible.
He is terrible, but the only person being in the story who has real reason to hate Sheepbagger is Bill and Trenmarth. And everyone else is like, we got to kill this guy because otherwise our gravy train is done. And we can't have these stupid peasants thinking that they can take out dragons. And if you think about it, it was kind of a good idea, and it's also hilarious how every time he comes up against an obstacle, he's like, we should stuff a sheep with poison and and feed it to Yennefer,
I guess if I was in his shoes and there was a dragon in my town, I'd probably be terrified. I guess I could agree with on that point.
Yeah, so he's not a good guy, but I do think that a lot of the hate that he gets from the other characters in the story is just because he's a peasant who's jumping up above his station.
Yeah, he's a shoemaker, right? Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, and the view of the peasants is pretty dim, honestly, in this story.
And there is a pretty clear hierarchy of where people stand. Nidamir's a king. We got Taya and Vea who are a royal guard to this mystical beast. Sheepbagger's pretty low. Shoemaker, yeah.
There's a theme here too. I think it fits into the whole royal power or the power thing, the power dynamics of all these different characters, which is that peasants are they're supposed to stay in their place, right? That's what we're told. They're not supposed to go above their station, and so that's what he's doing. He's going above his station, right? Both the dragon slayers hate him for that, and the king and Guildenstern don't like him for that, but as regular folk ourselves, we can have a view like yours, Michal. We say, well, his actions were fairly reasonable. Doing what he had to do. This dragon's eating their sheep. What's he going to do? Just let that continue to happen? He had an idea. They executed it. It worked pretty well, except that it had this awful social side effect of people coming down to thump him on the head for going above his station. But I think we're supposed to find it unreasonable, this notion that they're not allowed to defend themselves, that they're supposed to wait for their betters to come along and deal with it. Because I think that's from a human nature perspective, that's offensive. They can if they can deal with the problem themselves, then why not pass that method on to other people?
It does really fit with the title of the chapter, The Bounds of Reason. It does. Yeah. You're right on that.
Yeah.
And it's knightly combat, face your enemies on a battlefield. That's an attitude that has some merit to it, but it's not fair to present that as the only option when let's say you're the helpless guy that's needing justice and the king presents you with that as your option. Well, you have to fight this guy to get justice. That's not fair. That's not justice.
Fighting a dragon is a pretty unfair, but the dragon's got 100-to-1 handicap. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So society is against these lower born people using the things that are at their means, operating within their means. They're no, you can't even, you have to operate within knightly strictures, even though you're not a knight. You get none of the benefits of knighthood, but you have to behave honorably in combat. It's all these rules that they have to live by, but they get very little benefit from. So I think we're supposed to hate that. It's really unjust. So yeah.
Yeah.
What's next?
One sec. Let me scroll. We got Herblore, Aziz.
Oh yeah, of course. There's Herblore. Okay, so unless we have, should I go ahead with this, or are we ready to move on?
Do we have another quote?
This is a good quote. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Is this Borch also? Who says it? Just trying to get the voice. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Michal's going through
I don't want to go in with a Yennefer voice if it's Borch. Now you oppose natural law, Geralt. My wizard friend was in the habit of saying that each and every being can prevail in nature in one manner or another. The end of one existence always announces the beginning of another. There is no limit, at least when it comes to nature.
We almost went with that one for the opening quote because it does really speak to the title really well. There is no limit, like the limits of the possible. Well, according to this quote, there isn't one, at least according to nature, or when it's nature. So
yeah.
That's a really good one.
Which is an argument for Sheepbagger, to be honest, because if every being can prevail in nature in one manner or another, then, you know.
Well said. Yes, that's so true.
I can't believe I'm the Sheepbagger defense squad here, but like,
yeah, it's like now you oppose natural law. Like, what is he supposed to do? Not defend himself and his right? Like it's basically saying you can't champion order. Mm-hmm. You have to wait for someone else to come by and champion order for you. You can't fulfill that yourself, which is really like, yeah, that's offensive. Like if he can.
Michal's championing Sheepbagger but hates Nivellen. How is that fair?
Because Nivellen has power.
That's okay. That's true.
Also, Nivellen's a rapist, and
that's true.
There's that.
I'm comfortable in my.
Before we move on to herb lore, to Michal, you had a note about Geralt.
Just while we're on characters, I just find it so cute when Geralt goes over to Yennefer and he's like, first of all, when he realizes that she's in the party and he's like, 200 linters. And then also when she's like, you thought we were just going to sleep together like old times, didn't you? And he's like, oh my God, did she read my mind? And like, he does this more than once. Like there are other women who say things to him and he's like, oh my God, is she reading my mind right now? And it's like, no, Geralt, they're just smarter than you.
Yeah, they're just more aware of you than you. They know you better than you. I wonder if this line, just jumping back to Sheepbagger for just a second, this was a line that occurs to me, might not be in y'all's version. It may have translated differently, but in mine, there's the line, get out of my sight, boot buggerer, so I don't have to look at you anymore. Boot buggerer.
I'm pretty sure I'd remember if that was in mine. I don't think it is.
That's pretty good.
Oh my.
There's one actually there was one. I think there was another one. Maybe not. No, I guess not. Okay. Okay. So let's get into herb lore. There's four major. There's four herbs that come up. There's also some non-herbs like sulfur, like this. Basically, the poison they gave the dragon was like a what's what. I almost said who's who list, but these are objects, not people. So it's a what's what list of medieval poisons. And interestingly, there was no lilac and gooseberry this time. It's a notable absence. Geralt is not struck by that after having not been around her for 4 years. He doesn't have this reaction. So I wonder if Sapkowski had it to do over again, he would add like one sentence of that just to throw it in there. But maybe it was on purpose. Anyway, we have the three poisons used in the mixture to kill the dragon, and then one other substance. The first three, the poisons are hellebore, belladonna, and hemlock. Hellebore, it literally translates to injure food. So that's rather perfect for it being, because it's commonly used it's probably the most famous medieval poison. It's the name, in fact, derives from its use that way. It symbolizes scandal because of poisoning people, but it also symbolizes tranquility because it has a medicinal use of helping to calm, like they would say it supposedly cured madness. A little bit would supposedly cure madness, but a lot of it would cause madness. No one uses it anymore. It's well outside of modern pharmaceuticals. It's because it's too it's got too many side effects.
Kind of like people using turpentine and opium together and all sorts of, like in the 1800s when they were experimenting with medicine using cocaine and all sorts of other stuff.
You're very right. That's very much on the same sort of vein of thought here. There's some other alternate names for it. There's 20 species of hellebore, most of which are poisonous. Not all of them. Names like Christmas rose, winter rose, and Lenten rose, as in Lent, the rose of Lent, and that's because it grows during Lent, roughly, which is, as you can tell by the other names, around winter. So winter rose is kind of cool. It's remarkably frost resistant, which is, of course, that makes sense given when it grows. And medieval beliefs of it include that it was part of the brew to make witches fly and invisible. So, how about that? It's from the buttercup family, which is the same family as the name Jaskier translates, the ranunculi.
The dandelion.
Yeah. So, well, remember, dandelion was they changed it because his original translation was buttercup, and then they modified that. So, yeah. Anyway, because that's confusing because all those nicknames are Christmas rose, winter rose, Lenten rose, but it's a buttercup, not a rose. It only looks like a rose, but its family is not. Speaking scientifically. Next up is belladonna, aka deadly nightshade, aka Jimson weed. It translates to beautiful lady because it used to be used as a cosmetic. And oh my God, if you ever wanted an example of how women's beauty products cause harm, like the things women would have to go through to beautify themselves in ancient times are like, oh my God, it's harder to find a worse example. First of all, the symbolism of belladonna is danger, deception, and death. And yes, this is something women would put on themselves to look better, but you can dilate your eyes with drops of belladonna, which also messes you up. So they were literally sacrificing their mental health to look better. And of course, this was social pressure, most certainly. But I think
the only other thing that I could really think of in like medieval times that really harmed women was more of a physical object, was a corset, and it encouraged, terrible eating habits.
Actually,
yeah, sorry,
corsets weren't that bad.
Wait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's something I learned recently too, but Michal, I'm sure, can explain it better.
Yeah, well, basically, we had the versions of corsets that we have that survive today are the ones that weren't worn that much. So those are the really tiny, bad ones. Corsets were basically normal underwear, and not that some women didn't find them uncomfortable and restrictive, because I'm sure they did, but the essential purpose of a corset was to support you, not to squeeze your organs or break your ribs or stuff like that. So it's a big misconception. Also, really, you never ever wore corsets against your bare skin. You always wore them on over a shift. So it wasn't like you were sweating all. Yeah.
That's good to know.
I learned something
Thank
today.
you, Bernadette Banner.
Yeah, that is good to know. I'd only heard a little bit about that, and it was recent, so I'm really glad to have a full explanation there.
It shows what men know about corsets.
I mean, it's a huge misconception. So most people think this way, and honestly, I'm not yay corsets, but they were more or less normal underwear,
we think of, I'm sure Kyle and I are thinking of the scene in Pirates of the Caribbean where Keira Knightley basically faints from her corset,
Yeah. Yeah, which is not standard.
It's like these royal beauty standards that were that kind of trickled down in society when these women wanted to be considered high standard. You know what I mean? It's
everyone wore corsets. Working women wore corsets. There are videos about women getting dressed to be nurses in World War I, and they're putting on their corsets, and it's just it was basically underwear for centuries. It's really only the past 2 centuries that we haven't had a midriff kind of supportive thing.
Ryan said I was corset splaining. That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, it's really funny to think back on that scene in Pirates of the Caribbean too, because it's wait, Keira Knightley can't fit in a corset? What hope does anyone have? Why does she need to be prettier? What the hell?
I'm actually to be fair,
I don't know that costume designers wouldn't necessarily know that they're actually supposed to be comfortable or at least supportive and bearable. So it's totally Emma Watson has said she's not doing another movie in a corset. But that's also probably because she's had bad experiences with,
like if they're filming for 12 hours straight, like then that would get really nasty.
Right. And in something that's meant to be aesthetic also.
Yeah. Like if in real life it was worn for like an hour at a party and it's like, well, I got to wear it for 12 to film this. Nah, let's make it look like I'm wearing one and say I was.
Right. But back to herb lore.
Yeah. Back to herb lore. Hemlock. Hemlock's nicknames are poison parsley, carrot fern, devil's bread, or devil's porridge. It has pretty much the exact same symbolism as belladonna, meaning danger, deception, death, things like that. It's highly toxic and looks like wild carrots, so that probably caused a few issues back in the day. So it's also, all three of these are associated with some famous deaths. Not all of these are confirmed because, there wasn't ancient autopsies back in the day, but it's one of the suspicions about how Alexander the Great was killed or died was from hellebore. Augustus, as in the first emperor of Rome, may have been killed by belladonna, and Socrates was definitely killed by hemlock. So those also have some famous associations. In fact, hemlock was used for executions in Athens for a lot of people, not just Socrates. Also mentioned was mandrake. Mandrake is interesting. It's not a poison, though it's a hallucinogen and narcotic. Certainly taking enough of it would be bad for you, but it's more of an anesthetic. In ancient times, it was used that way to cause numbness. But relevant here is in traditions as old as Jewish scripture, it was believed to cure infertility. And the mention here was that when, of course, it's sad we have to bring this up again, is when when Dandelion is commenting on Yennefer's exposure, he says, wow, you must have used a lot of mandrake. Because he's referring to her to using it as some sort of anti-aging device, I guess. But I'm not sure that's actually supported here. But he may have been elixir-splaining there. So that's it. There was, like I said, no lilac and gooseberry smell this time. The herb lore wasn't as prominent, but it still tells a fun story as always.
Guys, I move that we change the name of our podcast to Witcher Splaining.
Witcher splaining, that's good.
Speaking of Witcher splaining, we're about to splain some lore and influences.
Yeah, lore and influences. Cool.
So lots of foreign lands have been mentioned, Aziz.
Yeah, we get mention of some places that are never mentioned again, as far as I know, like Ophir and Zamwibar, which sounds like Zanzibar, Zangwibar. And Zarakani, of course, is mentioned again. Although I wouldn't say it's major, it certainly comes up. So maybe those aren't super important, but they're fun to talk about. It sounds really cool. Zarakani, like dragon worship is a thing there. So I would certainly be up for more lore if Sapkowski decides to publish it. And apparently the games expand on a lot of this stuff. So it's not canon, but if you're curious for something, the wikis contain a lot of info on that, including like the fate of this hatchling and the more adventures of Borch, things like that. So the game adds some of that. I'm not super familiar with it, so I can't really speak to it, but I did notice that when I was researching this other stuff. Y'all are going to horny jail in chat, by the way. What is going on in chat?
I don't know. Anyways. Go ahead.
Keira Knightley diversion.
Oh, I started something, didn't I?
Just
by mentioning that name.
And then people were saying brunettes do it better and all sorts of shit in chat. You guys are just...
Some people, yeah, you said that, Kyle.
Oh, that was me?
Shame.
Shame. Anyways, go ahead.
We also get some mention that the Dragon Mountains are important. Not important, but that they're a thing. Like farther north of this area, there's even more dragons living in more isolated areas, which sort of pushes back a little bit on what we were talking before about dragons being a threat to human settlements. It seems like most of them just want to be in uninhabited places where humans don't want to be anyway, especially like the white dragons, which live in like frosty mountains, or the black dragons that live in swamps. Like people don't want to be there anyway. But there's also human settlements up in a different direction north. It's unclear because we don't have the map for that. But a certain archer character we have yet to meet gets their bow from this far north. So that's just something fun to keep in mind for later.
And this is a great character.
Yeah, I can't wait for her to be on screen. She's great. So also we have the mention of Akvist the dragon, who the Yarpen Ziggurat and his team killed. There's some lore on him. The game expands on him too. He's apparently like an albino red dragon, which is pretty cool. And his horde was incredible. And apparently some of the stones in his horde were mentioned in this story. Like I can't remember who it was. I think it was either Geralt or someone says, I've seen stones from his horde. And it's one of those things where it sounds like it's exaggerated. Like the dragon hordes are often exaggerated, just like a lot. We're supposed to believe that these rumors are kind of a little bit out of control. But this apparently is a case where maybe it wasn't exaggerated. But anyway, that's good stuff. So yeah, not a whole lot of extra lore that we haven't already touched on. This story really sticks to itself, I think, and it's really consistent with its own. It doesn't really have to tap into a lot of the existing world building, and that's the power of it being the second book. Fewer things have to be explained. The deeper you get into any world, the more you can get into just making a mention and having it mean something rather than having to explain everything as if it's new, because we already know a lot of the stuff. We already have backstory. It's like we can do inside jokes without explanation. So that's a good thing. So the lore is able to sit more comfortably in the background without needing as much explanation.
Yeah, now we're going to get into some influences. Also, I know some people play the games, so there's like basilisk lore in the games and stuff like that. They differ from the books of the games. That's one thing we did want to point out, but that's something we could probably do in another episode where we kind of do like maybe just like a bestiary focus or something like that. We will do special episodes in the future. We have talked about that.
Yeah. Yeah, tell us about basilisks a little bit.
Yeah, so basilisks are reptiles, and it's funny because when I was doing my research on it, they're reputed to be the king of serpents, and it's kind of funny because we get a golden dragon in this story, which is very kingly, obviously.
Arguably an even bigger king. He's the emperor of serpents. Yeah.
Sometimes,
or god.
Yeah. Sometimes they're referred to as a cockatrice. Many people know this is kind of like a Medusa-like creature where they can turn their enemies to stone, which is why we get the mirror thing. In mythology, the way you defeat Medusa is you turn a mirror on her and turn her to stone, or you behead her. So that's kind of some of the similarities that we see with the basilisk. Funny enough, basilisks are also found near Kaer Morhen, which is where witchers get some of their get most of their training. So it'd be interesting to see if Geralt brings Ciri around to some monster hunts later. There is some rumors that they're going to be doing some of that in the show next season. So maybe some little bit of deviations from the books. So that's pretty interesting. But yeah, basilisks are really interesting, and I found there's different mythologies that they are featured in. Greek mythology, like we said, gorgons. Medusa is a gorgon. They appear similarly in that mythology. Cockatrices and basilisks are kind of like bird / serpent. So they're kind of like manticores. They take on they're like an amalgam of different creatures mashed into one.
A serpent with wings does sound a little bit dragon-like too, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I found this. We talked a little bit when we do speak about influences. Sapkowski sometimes will delve into Christianity, or he'll go into like deep Polish folklore, but the basilisk, this is in Christianity, the basilisk usually represents evil and is a symbol of death. Christianity employed the symbol of basilisks at times with a number of other serpents to cast it as the devil itself. It's often used in coats of arms in Switzerland and based on, we talk a little bit about the coat of arms of dragons disease, which you found with the different ravens and stuff like that. So it's interesting.
Basilisk, Switzerland basilisk. That's pretty cool. Basilisk. That's neat.
There's actually a story that when it was recorded into history, there was this bishop was forced out during this Protestant Reformation, and the basilisk was blamed for an earthquake, which could kind of be compared to a rock slide. So I don't know if Sapkowski got some of his influence from that story, Aziz. I don't know. That's
Seems possible.
Yeah, and their venom can be used in potions and stuff like that. So they don't really expand on that, but we know Trial of the Grass. There's all sorts of poisons that are used and stuff like that. So Basilisk, pretty interesting. We don't get a ton of information on it, but it's pretty interesting in the way Sapkowski uses it in this story.
Yeah, and they pop up in a few other places. They're one of the more oft-mentioned creatures. Like, I know there's like basilisk leather appears in a few places, just like on shoes or like sword handle. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, it's definitely one of the more common monsters, I think, that he uses. So it's good that we have this explanation now early on.
And you said when we were chatting privately, me, you, Michal, Geralt makes a comment about Yennefer's boots. Those basilisk boots are expensive, bitch.
I think he says they're the most expensive leather. Yeah, something like that, which makes sense. I mean, yet here he only got paid 200 lintars for killing one. I guess if he gets to keep the skin, maybe that's some of his a little extra for him, but I don't know about that.
So yeah, but yeah, they're super poisonous. They have venom. They can turn you into stone, and they're sensitive to silver, which Geralt knows how to use. So pretty interesting. Definitely fight him a lot in The Witcher 3. I could probably upload a video on my channel of me fighting one and dying.
That'd be cool. So golden dragons. There is so much real world dragon lore that we decided not to really get into that, because it's just we would have to go into almost every culture that's ever existed and do their version of dragon lore, and there's no way we have time for all that. So suffice it to say, there is
a podcast episode. It's a podcast series.
You're right. Yeah, that exactly. Let alone a section in one podcast. Yeah. So there's a lot of that. But I did at least try to see if there are any real world golden dragon legends. And there aren't many. The most prominent one is in Chinese. There's Chinese, but it's more yellow than golden. But you can, that kind of is. This can be synonymous depending on how you view it. Like, especially if it's like scales and yellow, that could look golden. But the best match for this dragon, for what Borch is, actually comes from Dungeons and Dragons, because that's where they're very good. They believe in order in Dungeons and Dragons, so that's that fits really well here. Plus, they talk and they polymorph into whatever shape they want, which I couldn't find anywhere else. Now, again, since dragon lore is such a huge topic, it's entirely possible that it does have a real world influence that D&D borrowed from, that I'm only seeing like a farther down the timeline version of it. So, which is interesting to me, because I don't know. Sapkowski has said he's not a video gamer, but that doesn't mean he isn't familiar with D&D. But I would still be kind of surprised to know that he's a D&D guy. Maybe I'm just wrong. But anyway, this is cool, but in a little peculiar way. As far as the real world, this is the first time, or maybe not the first time. We didn't really have one for Voice of Reason either, I guess, but one of the first times we haven't had like a straight fairy tale reference, or at least a couple. Like Last Wish, we had a couple different ones, but some of the early ones we had like a strong one-to-one relationship for. It seems like Sapkowski's moved a little bit away from that and gone a little more indirect, but this one is pretty strong. There's a story, an ancient Polish tale called The Dragon of Wawel Hill. And a cobbler or cobbler's apprentice, depending on the version of the story, named Scuba with a K, feeds the dragon either a calf or a lamb filled with sulfur, and the dragon dies either from massive thirst or from it being stuck in his throat and basically drinking a lot till he dies. In some versions of the story, the character's name is Crack and not Scuba, and this Crack becomes a prince from a cobbler because he kills this dragon. It makes him famous and powerful. And in other versions, the story takes place during the reign of Krakus. Either way, the story is associated with Krakow, which is the former capital of Poland until like the 1500s. And so this all has that association. And to top it all off, Krakow is ancient, really ancient, and it began as a Stone Age settlement on Wawel Hill, aka the Dragon of Wawel Hill. And to this day, Krakow's Wildwell Hill area is a World Heritage Site because it's super, super, super old, like early Stone Age humans stuff is there. So that's cool. And one last bit of influence, Kyle mentioned this briefly. There is a real Polish noble family called Borch. And their actual coat of arms is 3 jackdaws or 3 ravens. Yeah. And well, jackdaws are relatives of ravens. It is Polish for 3 jackdaws. So noble family of Borch and if you go to Wikipedia, you can find this. There's a few mentions of real people who were in this family, and probably some more that didn't get mentioned.
Yeah,
if anyone knows the significance of this to Sapkowski, please tell me, because I'm very curious.
Yeah, right? Yeah. It's super cool.
I'm not sure if Sapkowski took any influence from Lord of the Rings, but I'm sure some of you got that vibe. I did want to mention that, of course, Smog was mentioned in the chat a few times today. Telepathy, Smog being a golden red dragon. That's kind of interesting. I kind of like the adventure of all the different factions of Bilbo Baggins and the dwarfs, and, obviously, them wanting to get back their kingdom and their horde, but we find out in the end it was the most important part of the story was their friendships that they made. Obviously, that's really kind of hammered home at the end of the Hobbit story, and that's kind of one of the main themes at the end of this one that I kind of wanted to talk about, that I thought, that Borch and Villain Trentemirth was kind of trying to tell people. So I thought, there was some similarities and fellowships between the stories.
Yeah. Calling the group a fellowship is a pretty good way to put it. Like we were talking about it as like a traveling village where it had all the different elements, but that's another way to put it. Yeah. It felt like having all the different parts, and not all of the parts are desirable, but all the parts are maybe useful.
well, it's funny because the dwarves were trying to get like this thing that represented power for them, right? Well, I can't remember what it's called in The Hobbit, that one jewel. What is it called? Somebody can.
The Silmarillion?
No, the jewel that the king went mad over, and then that one jewel that they found. I can't remember what it's called. You guys are gonna have to.
The Arc Stone.
Yeah, the Arc Stone. But then, like
Arkenstone.
Arkenstone. The Arkenstone. But then we find out that the child is kind of the Arkenstone in this one. Yeah, so I thought that was pretty cool, and we know that Sapkowski likes to invert things, so I thought that possibly that there is some sort of influence from Tolkien here. More than likely it is, but we can't confirm it.
Yeah, it's usually a safe assumption. Shall we talk about our selected funny moments?
Definitely.
All right.
The Arkenstone, thank you, chat. Yeah, I haven't had enough coffee today.
It is pretty. I need my own Arkenstone here.
Well,
we all need one.
You got that map in the background. That's a nice Arkenstone.
That's true. Thanks. Yeah, shout out Michael Klarfeld, whose site clairdocs.de is responsible for making this. You can actually purchase one of these through Chuck Lazarow's site, which is fanomaniacs.com. At least I think Chuck has these for sale. I got it from Chuck.
Link to Michael's site is in the description of the video, by the way. He made our intro for the podcast Surprise.
Yeah, he did.
So you can support him. Michael. Yeah, so all of that, you can buy the digital copy and go to a printing site on your own and go get that. Shout out to him. Michal, what was your funniest moment? And you also found something interesting that we didn't have last time, re-included.
I think we did have one in the last episode, but yeah, now we have a pirouette again. Woo!
Woo, pirouettes.
Let's see. What were some of my favorite funny things? There were a lot of funny things in the story. I really love Yarpen's mispronounced speech to the dragon when he's heralding, that Ike is going to come at him with conventional weapons and whatever. And I don't know if this is a parallel intentionally, but it really reminded me of like Dogberry, the constable from Much Ado About Nothing, who can't say a sentence without saying it wrong. So that was what that reminded me of. And then obviously, we have that whole thing, and then Villain Trendemirth destroys Ike, and Yarpen just goes, fuck. It was so funny.
I have a question about everyone's translation here, because let me find it. when he says non-conventional weapons, he says only conventional weapons, and Yarpen says, "Does anybody know what a confessional weapon is?"
Yeah. I don't remember if he says confessional or conversational, but he says one of those.
That's really good. What's a conventional weapon? What's a confessional weapon? So I love how Borch calls the dude who gets his head cut off my darling, and then he later calls Geralt my dear. He calls the innkeeper my beauty and my good fellow and my dear chap. So he really does like humans.
Oh, he's getting mad compliments from them.
Yeah, he's giving them mad money. He's like, that's not it. This is not an advance. It's a tip. Now off to the kitchen, you know?
Yeah, that reminded me a little bit of, I was at Con of Thrones last 2 years. I don't remember the whatever time, but like
who knows?
In the past.
It was the last Con of Thrones, and Nikolai Coster-Waldau was talking about how like he was talking to Charles Dance in the first season, and he was like, "Oh, how long are you on this for?" And he was saying like, "Oh, well, darling, you know, I think it's for 3 episodes, but I don't really know." And he was saying how he called everyone darling because he met so many people that he just couldn't bother to remember their name. So he would call his assistant darling, and just everyone he met was just darling.
That's how you know you're a good actor. You can just like, he has no idea what's going on, but still like he looks like he totally is in control at all times.
Exactly.
Charles Dance is a master.
Yeah. I love how I still blows me away, Kyle, that you told us that he's the voice of Emperor of Emhyr in the show, right?
Yeah.
Or in the books? I mean, in the games.
Yeah.
Third time's a charm. Games.
Yeah, he's like a lot. I mean, we have a lot of crossover Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, Witcher fans, right? So people are.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I like that Vea and Tea's names, he says their names are too hard to pronounce, and then it turns out to be like Alvealnerle, but that's not any harder than Merg to Brake or Villain Trettenmirth. So it's like, man, Zerrikania's got some tough names. I love this bit about knighthood here. Here's a quote. Can you guys read this one?
Where?
Yes.
Where?
Sorry. I see you're not troubled by lack of silver.
So who reads that one? Me or her?
Sure. Yeah.
I see you're not troubled by lack of silver. Do you live by the privileges of knighthood?
Partly. Rujako smiled in answer and didn't elaborate.
So this is obviously part of the setup for him actually being a dragon, but I think there's more. The joke is actually bigger here, which is that he's had all these. He's had a long life, presumably, and he's probably had knights before Ike come for him, and quite likely he's, lived by the privileges of knighthood in that they've come and tried to kill him, and he gets their stuff because they fail.
He's got mad loot from them.
Yeah, he's got a big collection of looted victorious stuff. So, and which makes the opening scene a little funnier because they stumble upon a riderless horse because Geralt's inside fighting the basilisk. But like after Borch fights some knight, that's often what's going to exactly be left behind. And it'll be okay for him to loot the saddlebags in that case because there's no guessing about the death of the rider. They know he's the one who just killed the rider, so he can loot whatever he wants.
So Jaskier Dandelion was pretty funny in this one. He's sarcastic as always.
Yeah, we've got a good line here. When he wants to, he asks to be told. They're asking him for the story because he's been. Remember, if we recall, he's been sitting at the bridge waiting for several days when Geralt and company show up. So he has more of an idea what's going on, and so he asks for the story. And he says, "What would you prefer, in verse or in prose?" and they say, "Normally." As you like. Jaskier did not lay down his loot. He's like, "No, I'll have my chance soon enough. Don't worry. I'm gonna rip into a song at some point."
And that's his whole reason for being there. He's like, "Listen, I'm gonna write this legend. I'm gonna write this fucking song." So, Geralt's probably so annoyed by that.
Yeah. He loves the music. He just doesn't want to admit it. He doesn't want to encourage Dandelion, because if you encourage him, then he really goes too far. The proper setting to put Dandelion on is, we don't want to hear that, because he'll still play. If you tell him you want to play, then he'll play too much. But if you tell him you don't want to hear, he'll play the right amount.
Michal,
You're going for mute.
Michal, any other funny moments that stood up for you?
Let me see. Yeah, I wasn't super, I didn't love the fact that the guard was drawing a picture of a woman, a very specific part of a woman seen from an unusual angle, but that was kind of funny.
Just the wording.
Yeah.
Clever.
And then the name, that guard is referred to differently as the scene progresses. So he starts off as the artistic guard, and then he's the halberdier, and then he's the halberdier newly raised to nobility, and then he's the future centurion, and then the final reference is raise the barrier, the rich decurion with a good chance of becoming a centurion shouted to the halberdier.
That's so good. He gets promoted throughout the scene.
Yeah. And it's just tossed in there. I really like that kind of casual thing.
By the way, that's another example of the translations being different, because in my translated copy it says lieutenant and captain, not centurion and decurion. But otherwise, but of course the joke is the same. But yeah.
And Sapkowski is playing a lot with the idea of hierarchy in this story, so he's kind of just throwing us a bone there.
It does fit the theme there. This guy is rising through the ranks because of circumstance, and someone wants something. He temporarily has a lot of power just by having the ability to let these people over the bridge.
So yeah, I think that pretty much is that it for the pod today, guys?
I think so.
Woohoo! So yeah,
right.
It's been a while since it's been, I think a month and a half. Thank you for the wait. There was a lot of things going on, and election anxiety and things that were going on, and scheduling.
I had no internet for a whole week, y'all. If people who didn't know, who don't follow my other stuff. Yeah. So
that's when we had the actual, we had a schedule the third, 2 nights after the American election, the US election, but it actually worked out because there was so much, everybody was glued to their TVs and there was no announcement of the winner. So it kind of worked out because I think everybody's anxieties, North America was pretty high during that week. And I don't think any of us would have been able to really write like we normally do and be
It's hard to do a podcast when you are literally the dog drinking coffee with the "this is fine" and fire all around him.
That is the perfect analogy. Yeah.
It's hard to be, it is hard to be creative when there's, in such a scenario.
But we want to thank everyone for joining today. Of course, I believe Amy joined mid-podcast to our sponsor to sponsor the podcast, so we really appreciate that. For all of you that are here, we really appreciate it, like we said. The next episode will be a month from now. We're going to try to do it exactly a month from now. Will be a Shard of Ice, fittingly enough, in December. So our Christmas, I think we're going to do more of a fun, funky Christmas sweater type of deal. We may actually do a little bit of a bonus episode. We talked about it, not confirmed yet, but maybe a fun trivia.
We got some ideas. Yeah. We'll see what manifests. But yes, if you guys have suggestions or which one of those type of bonus episodes you'd like to hear, certainly let us know. That'll help us decide.
You can find the link to our podcast, our podcast, Anchor, all the links to Spotify, all of that, our sponsor homepage in the description of the video. Also, to our Facebook group. That's where we do all of our posts. We don't just talk about the books. We talk about the show. Ryan is someone in chat who posts a lot about the games. We kind of joke around and post memes. It's really just an open group, an open invitation to anybody that likes The Witcher. And we just hang out and chat, and we do our kind of podcasts discussions. We usually have a post that we do that usually one of us will initiate. We kind of switch it up on who does it.
Actually, let me jump in real quick. I forgot to mention this during the episode, and it's a good time to bring it up now. One of the most recent discussion topic we had was something from this episode that I've neglected to mention, which is there's a moment where Borch is telling Geralt to stay, and then he changes his mind. He says, actually, go ahead, go to the front of the column like you're planning on doing. And then he drops the rock slide. So the implication is that Borch was, at first he was like, no, stay here so you don't get hit by the rock slide. But then he's like, actually, go ahead, because I think he decides that it would be better if Geralt's killed in the rock slide, because I think he's anticipating having to fight him and doesn't want to. So that was an interesting thing to talk about, because we're not entirely sure if that interpretation is correct. But it's a good example of the kind of thing we discuss, the little details and the bigger details, over in our Facebook group.
Also privately in chat.
Yeah, that too.
We kind of had a little bit of a debate about this. But yeah, so we discuss all sorts of stuff, and we post updates. So if we're pushing the stream back, or we're doing extra stream or stuff like that, that's where we post most of our updates. We also have a Podcast of Surprise Twitter page, Pod of Surprise. You can follow us there. We do updates and stuff like that. We all post on our own Twitter pages. You can find the link to all of our stuff in the description of the video. What's next for you, Michal?
So you can find me at the Vassals of Kingsgrave. We're doing a Harry Potter reread right now. We also do just general nerd and conversational stuff. At Level 7 Access, obviously we've wrapped up Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because that show is over, but we are now covering The Mandalorian week by week. And my other podcast is the Nice Jewish Fangirls podcast, which just put out a new episode. So about horror and scary things and stuff like that. It was supposed to come out before Halloween, but then we had massive technical difficulties. Yeah. And I'm on Twitter at InkAsRain.
Ink as rain. It's funny. I was just gonna say it, but you said I was gonna say Incus. So it's better that you said Ink as rain. I can't fucking read today. My God. So you can find Michal's stuff in the description of the video. Aziz, what's next for you?
Well, still churning over at History of Westeros podcast. We've been doing our Valar rereadists. We were in the first third of A Dance with Dragons. We've put out a couple of scripted episodes lately, a Defiance of Duskendale episode, and part 2 of our Blackwood series. And we're working on some series of episodes about giants with Crowfoot's daughter, aka the Disputed Lands. That's probably what's next, besides more Valar rereadists. And other than that, I'm almost through with my most current Witcher reread, and I'm thinking about what to read next. I'm doing 2 rereads at once. It's fun. Well, I'm definitely going to reread The Expanse with the show coming back soon. But I'm also reading book 4 of Stormlight Archive right now, which just came out. But I'll probably tear through that because it's a completely new book. And you know how we nerds get when we get a new book in one of our many beloved series. We usually just, we tear through.
So
that's what's happening.
You can find Aziz's links in the description of the video as well. Aziz will be actually joining me and Helen. We're going to be doing we do our Mandalorian episode reviews, our live streams on Saturdays at 4 p.m. Aziz is going to join us for one of those. I believe episode 7 or 8 once we have more episodes in the season. So that's going to be really fun. For me, actually, Aziz's partner Shea is going to be joining me for Expanse coverage. It's going to have the first 3 episodes drop all at once on Amazon, kind of like The Boys. And then after that, it's going to be weekly. So for those of you that don't know, me and Ashaya got to interview Wes Chatham and Stephen Strait, who play Holden and Amos. So that's going to be super fun. And we're going to be discussing that. And that's something that I'll be doing on the channel tomorrow. I actually posted it in the podcast. Surprised you guys want to check it out. A lot of Witcher Season 2 news. I'm doing a live stream at 1 p.m. tomorrow on some of the show stuff if you guys want to join. And PS5, some gaming playthroughs. So you'll see me play Assassin's Creed, God of War, and all sorts of other games on the channel. That's going to do it for today, everyone. Thank you so much for the support, everybody that joined us today. And like I said, thank you from all of us to you who joined us. This was super fun. And we shall see you soon. Stay safe, wear a mask, and have